So I want to get more specific about some of those foods. Okay, and if you have questions along the way, again, ask. I'm going to talk about some of the main ones that cause people issues. Wheat, sugar, corn, dairy, soy. Okay? So let's just get into that, I guess. First of all, wheat. Okay? And let me explain this first. All of these foods have been used somewhat by different people, different cultures, at different times all throughout the world. Okay? So what's happened from when we use these as foods and what's happening now? Why are so many people having problems with these types of foods now? Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of explore here. So wheat, okay? And you'll find a trend here. I mentioned it last week. Whatever food seems to be in everything suddenly is seeming to become problematic for people. Okay? So wheat. It's one of those things that's in everything. Okay? If you take wheat, if you go out in the field and you take wheat, you can't eat it. Okay? This stuff's hard as a rock. Has anybody ever actually felt wheat? What it's like? Would you eat that?
That's surrounded by wheat fields.
Yeah. You can't eat it. It's not edible. It's not edible until you process it. So to begin with, it's very hard for us to even digest and break down. It's really high in something called phytic acid, which is very hard for our system to digest and break down. When you look at wheat in cultures around the world throughout history, what's really fascinating is that not all, but a lot of cultures would grow grain only to store in storage bins to use in times of famine. Okay? When a famine hit, or a crop failure, or the winter, or whatever it was, they would eat the wheat, or those types of grains, only when they had to as a last resort. So, but there's other cultures that have used wheat throughout history to make breads and things like that, but just like everything else, we've genetically modified it, we've processed it, we've totally altered the original look of what wheat is. It's not a perfect food in the first place, and then what we've done to it on top of it, there's no wonder people are having so many reactions to it. Okay? White flour, white bread, white pasta, all those things. I mean, everybody knows it's like mainstream news now to avoid the white stuff, right? But what are people doing? They're buying whole wheat bread and things like that. It's really not any better. Okay? It's just advertising, it's marketing. Okay? So again, you're part of this new consciousness. Okay? Don't believe everything you see on a TV commercial. We know that. You know, we know there's big businesses pushing wheat, pushing soy, pushing dairy, pushing meat, things like this. So we have to be conscious and aware of that.
So if you have to do bread, what kind should you do? Like the sprouted?
Yeah, sprouted whole grain breads. Yeah.
Ezekiel.
Yeah, Ezekiel breads. There's a Genesis 129. Any of the sprouted whole grain breads.
And that's okay for the body ecology with the kids?
Yeah, she doesn't recommend it in the first 3 months of the body ecology program.
After that.
Yeah, but after that, and since we're talking about Candida, again, if you have a severe issue, if you have a reaction to a food, don't eat it. It's as simple as that. That's your body telling you that it doesn't want it, it doesn't like it, it doesn't need it, it's reacting to something. Listen to that. You know, we need to trust our instincts more. We're so, you know, we grew up eating bread, we grew up eating sandwiches, and then we develop problems, but instead of not eating bread, we think, oh my gosh, how could we ever possibly live without bread? You know, we try to find all these alternatives. We go to whole grain, and then we go to the 7 grain, and then we go to this and that, and we try every bread humanly possible that's out there because we want to eat bread. Well, if your body's having a reaction to it, just stop eating bread. It's not the end of the world. You know, it's, again, I just think we're just conditioned from these foods we've been eating our whole lives. So, I had the same problem. What's that?
We love it. We do love it.
Oh, I know. And it is easier said than done. And I went, and I'm saying this because I speak from experience. I was having problems with bread, and I went through every kind of bread on the planet, and then I found out that the healthiest bread you could eat was sprouted whole grain bread, and I ate sprouted whole grain bread, and my body didn't like it. I'm like, crap.
No, I don't think
So eventually, I just stopped eating bread, and I don't eat bread anymore, and it's not a big deal, you know. I think it's once you've finally got it out of your system that you can live without it, it's really not that big of a deal, and we'll find that with a lot of these
think
foods.
that it's made of stuff, the same stuff that glue is made of.
Right? Yeah. How did
So,
you make
like,
glue when you were in grade school? You took flour and water, and you have glue.
And
Yeah,
if you just
exactly.
think of that, you think, I don't want to be having glue, and I want it to be slipping out. I don't want to be sticking together.
Yep, exactly. And so some of the other things with gluten, we know people are sensitive to gluten, but it is the #1 thing that'll feed organisms in your body. That'll feed Candida, yeast, fungus, molds, things like that. They love yeast. Okay? So that is the #1 thing you want to cut out if you have any kind of a Candida fungal issue.
So is that why you're not supposed to drink the, what's it, kombucha?
Kombucha is a wild fermentation, and it will feed Candida.
Is yeast and gluten the same thing?
No.
Okay.
No.
The way you said that, I just almost made it sound.
No, gluten is actually the protein that's in barley, oats, wheat, things like that, and people are having like with celiac and things like that, are having a reaction to the gluten.
Okay.
Yeah. But I give some of the wheat, barley, oats, rye, some of the foods that are really high in gluten, and some alternatives. And the alternatives are all Candida-friendly foods. The quinoa, amaranth, millet, and buckwheat. Okay, and they're right there on the sheet. So any questions about wheat?
No, but I had a question about you.
About me?
When you said that you ate the sprouted bread
Yes.
and your body reacted. Now, what way did your body react?
Pain in my abdominal area, my rib cage area. It would itch around my eyes and my feet. Yeah. Now you were here last week, right? Yeah, where I talked last week kind of about what I had been going through with my blocked lymphatic system, which backed up my system, and I was reacting and having allergies and sensitivities to foods and things like that. So yeah, even a super healthy sprouted whole grain bread, my body wasn't processing it. And the reason makes sense. When you think about high residue versus low residue foods, I'm so glad you brought this up. Even though it's the healthiest kind of bread you can eat, it still leaves a residue. Okay? Because it's still a processed grain, it's still a processed flour, it still has yeast in it, right? Okay? So I could eat all the vegetables on the world and drink water and do the amaranth and millet and those kind of, I'd never have a problem with those. But even the bread, because it's a high residue food. Now again, if you eat bread, you eat whole sprouted grain bread, you don't have any Candida yeast issues or anything, no reactions to that food, yeah, it's one of the best foods you can eat, but not for everybody. That's kind of, the whole point to this, is that, these foods can be great for some people, but not in a compromised system, and especially somebody with Candida fungal issues. Because I see that a lot. People have systemic Candida, and they want to find that bread they can eat. What's the bread I can eat? But it still leaves a residue, and it still feeds the Candida.
I just want to know what gluten is.
Gluten is protein that's in grain that people are having a reaction to. Okay? Just like the protein in milk, which is called casein, people have allergic reactions to. You can have an allergic reaction to anything that's a protein. So, yeah, there's all types of different proteins that people are allergic to, but gluten's one of the worst. Yeah.
Would you mind just talking a little bit about all the gluten-free product breads, like making rice and potato and everything under the sun?
Yeah. Again, it's marketing. It really is. Now if you have celiac and gluten is your only problem, you may be able to be fine eating gluten-free. But I think a lot of people that have gluten intolerances and weaknesses in their body find that they have these types of infections, fungal infections and things like that. So eating gluten-free might help, but they're still eating foods that feed organisms in the body. The rice, they're still eating breads and pastas and all these kind of things. They're gluten-free, so they're not crippled over, doubled over in pain, okay? Because that's what happens. When people are severely gluten intolerant or allergic to dairy and things like that, they can literally be on the floor writhing in pain. It's that bad, Okay, so instead they eat an alternative that doesn't have them writhing in pain, but it's still not good for their system. It's still feeding organisms in their system. They still haven't done anything to address their health problem. Okay, because obviously there's some kind of a problem going on if you're severely. Did that answer